I'm coming in today from Guelph on the ancestral and treaty lands of several Indigenous peoples, including the Attawandaron people and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And we're part of the larger Dish with One Spoon covenant territory, and that speaks to our collective responsibility to steward and sustain the land on which we live and work, which is very pertinent to our conversations today and to Orange Shirt Day tomorrow. So I'd like to, I think I'm sharing my screen now. I'm going to put my slides. Can everybody see what I've got?
Yes, we can.
Right. So thanks so much, Teresa, Betsy, Claire, the other organizers, and also the presenters so far. I've learned a lot, and some of what I'm going to talk about has been covered, so I'll try and compress that if I can. I'm going to talk about two infrastructure initiatives today. One is the Canadian Writing Research Collaboratory, or CWRC, which we pronounce QUIRC. The other is the Linked Infrastructure for Networked Cultural Scholarship, which we call LINCS. And I worked to develop these projects with many others, including Dr. Sarah Roger, who is with me here today as the LINCS project manager. And I'm going to talk about those two projects and then offer my perspective on how digital humanities sustainability sits in the context of the geopolitical entity called Canada. So we were invited to talk about the infrastructural journey, and I'm going to start with Orlando, not Florida, but the Orlando project, which began in 1995. So it's fairly long in the tooth as far as ongoing born digital online DH projects go. And it's an experiment in literary history, as Teresa said. We publish with Cambridge University Press and are still updating regularly. It developed in the 90s a back-end infrastructure to create, revise, basically to support collaboration and knowledge production. That infrastructure is entering its third iteration after the sort of grassroots one that we built up within the project, and that's the QUIRC project. And the front end is on its second iteration now, having migrated from what we first published in 2006. And so I want to talk about this in terms of standards, because this is one of the things that really makes migration hard in a lot of cases, and I think needs to be borne in mind from the outset when any digital project is starting. So Orlando was able to sustain itself. It hasn't been easy, just like, we've heard these stories, and our story is very similar. But by migrating platforms multiple times, it has sustained itself, and it was able to do that in large part thanks to early adoption of standards, migrating to new standards as they arose, and then being able to leverage emergent standards like the ones associated with linked open data to generate open data, because we are published through Cambridge. That helps to sustain us, but we are also able to push out our data in an open form as well. So talking about the connection between infrastructure and standards. It's meant that we've been able to share our data with other projects like the Women Writers Project, a bibliographic project on women's writing, and so on, and transform our own data to work with it more easily in other forms. So that takes us then to the Canadian Writing Research Collaboratory, which is the second and will be the third backend for Orlando, but for many other projects as well. The image here is of the current interface, but we're right now upgrading it under the umbrella of LEAF, the Linked Editing Academic Framework, an international group that's grown up around QUIRC and is contributing to its sustainability. So it was initially created to provide a backend for Orlando, but also for other projects, because as we were working on Orlando and showing what we were doing, people were saying, we want to be able to do that too. And we realized there were infrastructure needs there, and we're very fortunate to be funded to try to fill those as the midterm reviewers for the project suggested. So its mission statement, which is on the left here, reads as quite narrow now compared to what we've got. We've got projects in design. We've got projects coming out of sociology, Indigenous studies, performance studies. So we're actually thinking of renaming it, keeping the acronym, to the Collaboratory for Writing and Research on Culture to make the breadth more clear. You can do lots of things within QUIRC. It hosts text and multimedia content, has a lot of inbuilt functionality to allow people to organize, curate, edit, publish in various ways. It supports pedagogical projects, and its content can be downloaded and either individual objects or in bulk and used beyond Cork as well. It's been growing steadily. One of its key features is the fact that it has it hosts everything together, and you can search it and browse across it, and that's one of its powers. But it also has these individually customizable project pages where people can document, share, and they can search and work within a single project rather than having to work across the whole collaboratory the whole time. And there's user dashboards to support collaboration and workflow, tracking of work, and so on. It is, very much about thinking of digital scholarship as iterative and collaborative, and also sustainable. And so that's really what the rest of my presentation is going to focus on, is that tension between the dynamic, the iterative, and sustainability. So we are hooked into Canada's long-term preservation workflows. Infrastructure, as we know, is really all about care and repair. And one of the things that Cork has done is provide a retirement place for what I think of as endangered data sets, or data sets as at risk, because the first generation, the first really substantial generation of scholars who've created digital work is now retiring. People are losing access to servers and so on. So the question is, how do you keep that data available? So we're keen to make opportunities for people to preserve that data through Cork, but also to make opportunities for emergent scholars to be involved and to take on care for existing data sets, updating and reframing them in light of current scholarly debates. And we've already talked about how projects do have to move with those debates. That's what it is to create knowledge. And this has actually proven a very effective career building move for some scholars. And so here's just an example of a quite large, unparalleled data set of metadata that indexes a lot of content that has been digitized through the Canadiana collections and the Heritage collections. And it's hugely valuable, but just like the case that Hans mentioned, there is offensive content in that metadata. We're taking decolonization seriously and doing what we can to remediate the metadata and make it more appropriate. But it would be fantastic to have scholars in early Canadian periodical culture, librarians, anybody interested in doing the sort of domain work that Cork as an infrastructure cannot take on. It's a significant opportunity both to create scholarship of one's own and also to serve the larger community in keeping the resource alive. So that's sort of the concept of a collaboratory, is that we can work together, pool resources, and create a better knowledge environment overall. And Cork is really founded on the notion that data should not just repose. It's important to have repositories. I am not undermining the importance of repositories in any way, but I think we can build on the infinite revisability of digital data to collaborate and keep data current and relevant if we have these sorts of infrastructures in place. Virtual research environments like Cork allow for the activity of individuals to be tracked and credited so that labor can be recognized. And that's why it's actually built on repository software, Cork is and Leaf is, but we're taking that and extending it considerably to support those sorts of activities. Sustainability is a challenge. I'm happy to talk about that in more detail. I mean, really the strategy here is about putting lots of eggs in a single basket and hoping that nobody will allow it to drop. And I'll talk a bit more about the larger context towards the end. But we also, it's, I guess, the cemetery model, as it was described, taking funds from active funded projects and then trying to put them into operations as well as to support new functionality when that's possible. And we are preserving the collaboratory in Borealis, collaboratory contents in Borealis as well. So we're both taking the repository route and the collaboratory route. And the Quirk project is also connected to another infrastructure project funded as what was called cyber infrastructure with a competition, which is in beta or testing phase right now, and that is Links. And Links is a suite of tools for creating linked open data, which we've already been talking about quite a bit. So what I'm going to go over quite quickly here will be a review for those of you who are familiar, but for those who are not, hopefully it will be somewhat useful. Links was funded to promote usable data, basically data sustainability through linked data. And you've probably all come across the idea of ORCIDs or researcher identifiers. They are persistent identifiers. They're sort of at the foundation of linked open data in a range of ways. And if you have an ORCID ID, the fact that there are other identifiers out there in the scholarly ecosystem, like digital object identifiers, means that you can go to the ORCID site, you can press the, I'm out of order. You can press the plus button to add new works to your record, and there are various databases that you can then search for and link your own ORCID ID to, and it will just sort of magically pull in all these records of publications that you've created. So ORCID has this slogan, enter once, reuse often. That is the magic and the beauty of linked open data, is that it can pull all your stuff together and make your research way more findable, citable, and referenceable. And that's what librarians are doing for your research outputs. That's what Links is doing for culture, linking up data to make it more findable, to bring it together in ways that will support new kinds of research. So I'm just going to say that that is really what FAIR data is about, is under the FAIR principles, when you look at them, they're all about data linking. They're all about using these sorts of standards like PIDs and bringing data together. Linked data is highly structured data. We've talked about it a little bit. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but again, it's based on standards, semantic technologies in particular, a range of them that creates a quite complex infrastructure stack, but it's quite simple conceptually. It's about bringing data into more explicit and structured form. It also, by making the data more processable, machine readable, it becomes mobile in a way that other data is not. So this is just a screenshot of a links tool that can scan a website. It will look for entities that it knows something about. If it finds an entity it knows about, it'll tell you what other connected entities are, and then it will let you see, how those connections work. So your data is no longer stuck within a single interface, which is one of the challenges when it comes to sustainability, is maintaining the interface as opposed to maintaining the data. So altogether, it creates data that can really contribute to a much richer research environment. Links in beta form is about converting data as well as accessing it. There aren't, as far as creating linked data goes, we can talk about that more. We've already started in the discussion earlier. They're not push button or easy handoff solutions. It requires some expertise. You need to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate as a representation of your data. But we've created a portal with a lot of documentation about how you go about creating data, and are trying to direct it to novices as well as experts. We consult and train and support researchers using the tools. So do be in touch if you're interested. The sustainability is a challenge in this context, as I'll get to in a moment, but linked data done right, as Christian said, is a form of self-documentation that makes it much more reusable and a much greater contribution to the scholarly ecosystem. So Links is about trying to provide the opportunity for researchers in Canada to work with linked open data at scale, which is because I say that, as I said, the infrastructure stack is complex. That can be a challenge for many. So it's an exciting opportunity for new research, but it is at its core, and what it was funded as was a data sustainability initiative. So I want to talk just a tiny bit more about context. It's important when we're thinking about FAIR data to recognize that is accompanied not only by the basic principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, but we have to think of it in conjunction with the CARE and OCAP principles associated with Indigenous data sovereignty. Open is not always good. These principles remind us that knowledge always embeds relations and that we have to relate data responsibly. So both Quirk and Lynx have been working to try to make digital scholarship more sustainable, more accessible, and more inclusive. That, I've argued, means working with standards to promote interoperability, and it also means working with researchers to ensure that they understand, what makes sense for their data. And it means working in respectful ways with Indigenous partners, such as the Respectful Terminologies Platform Project, which is a very exciting new initiative that's working towards Indigenous community-approved permanent identifiers, or PIDs. So there's a tension here that I've been pointing to in terms of thinking about standards and interoperability that makes data interface independent. Right? It can go into a repository and be looked after. It can be, published as linked open data, very reusable. But the fact that we, as humanities scholars and as human beings, we do better when we're interacting with data through an interface. Much humanities data doesn't really have a shelf life like scientific data does. We reuse it. It's part of a larger scholarly conversation, continues to be recycled, referred to, and recontextualized in the context of knowledge production. And long-term preservation means putting it in a repo. So I'm arguing that this is not access, what we see in a repository, in the most meaningful sense, and that we need to think in terms of how we make things accessible through interfaces. But putting your data in a standard format makes it possible for many, many different interfaces to interact with it. And that is the strength of linked data and of standards-based data production. So I'll just end by thinking about, very, very briefly, gesturing to the larger context here, which is that in Canada, we fund things called infrastructure projects through the Canada Foundation for Innovation, but there's not actually an operations wing to CFI. And there's been a lot of attempts, including through the cyber infrastructure program, to think about how to do that. But we're still in a situation where there's this big gap in terms of infrastructure funding. It always looks to us, it's sad to hear these stories from the EU, because it looks to us like the grass is so much greener on the other side of the Atlantic in terms of funding possibilities. While we're sort of waiting to figure out what the path for funding the maintenance and renewal of digital research infrastructure is. What I'm saying here really aligns with the report that came out in the spring from the Bouchard report, which flagged the need for a new paradigm for research infrastructure. I think that the point about libraries that was just made, I think maybe by Michael in the last discussion, is a really good one, because what libraries know how to do is to work across institutions, to work across provinces, to address big problems. And that's where the Borealis repository system has come from Scholars Portal and from libraries across the country. So I've learned a ton from librarians about how we approach these things. And I think they are absolutely essential partners in the process of trying to figure out how, in the words of the description of the symposium, we can learn to work together to secure funding, resources, and talent to support dynamic, renewable, scholarly infrastructure. So I'm going to say thank you so much. Very grateful for your participation. I skipped the context, the slide with the links there to email us. I'll put a link to the slides in the chat so that people can get the live links from it. And I did just want to put in a pitch for NICLA, which is the the organization behind the Respectful Terminologies Platform Project. If you're looking for something meaningful to do to recognize Truth and Reconciliation Day, this is one route to go if you care about improving our knowledge environment and decolonizing our infrastructures. So thank you so much.